Welcome back again. Welcome back again for week 5 of AP Research. So in this particular video, we're going to be dealing with how styles of research turn out to go. And by styles, I mean what type of data are you going to be collecting. So it's not the explore, explain, create. It's going to be, are you qualitative? Are you quantitative? Are you mixed methods? Are you something a little bit different? So this turns out to be something that the question you ask will dictate what you're going to do. A lot of you have asked questions that turn out to be, oh, so like what happens if you do this, or how do these two things relate to each other? Those types of questions suggest, they don't mean that they are, but they suggest quantitative research, meaning they are suggesting that you want to gather numbers. And you're going to then need to do some statistical analyses of those numbers. I have a book. It deals with behavioral sciences, so it's not perfect for all things, but I have a book on basic statistics. If you're in AP Stats, that would help. If you aren't interested in anything dealing with numbers, quantitative research might not be your thing, because you're going to need to deal with numbers and finding out correlations or running an ANOVA to see, oh, do these factors turn out to even relate to each other? So there's a lot of stuff in with quantitative analyses that might terrify some of you. If you like that, go for it. But you need to be aware that if you're asking relationships, that tends to suggest that you're dealing with numbers. If you wish to explain things, so you're not exploring, but you wish to explain, typically, what you're going to end up trying to do is gather qualitative. It's, well, why did you answer this question this way? How did you feel about this? And what you're trying to do is you're gathering basically whole summaries of what people are saying and how they're feeling, and you're attempting to see what is the grand pattern in linking some relationship to what happens. So we're trying to see what is the cause of the pattern that we see. Quantitative data, for the most part, again, I'm generalizing, but quantitative data for the most part are very good at helping you figure out if there's a pattern. Qualitative data tend to explain this is why the pattern is there, assuming that there's a pattern. That's typically what we use with qualitative data. It's why if you were to write a paper in an history class and it's like, well, what are the causes of World War II? It's the causes, so which means you need to explain the causes. It's all words. If you're to say, what is the relationship between, I don't know, political unrest and the start of World War II? Well, that's dealing with numbers, and that's like, oh, well, statistics were showing this and this and this, and notice that as we had a rise in popular feelings of this, that it also happens to correlate with the rise of Hitler's power or stuff like that. That is dealing with statistics, that's dealing with numbers. That's seeing, is there a pattern? If you're trying to explain the pattern, that's qualitative research. And sometimes you need to do a little bit of both, because you're going to try a little bit of number and a little bit of let me explain. It does not necessarily require you to go all out in qualitative and quantitative, but you get to deal with a little bit of both. My master's was a little bit of both, to be honest. Just the way that my question was worded, it suggested that I should explore a little bit of both. I probably shouldn't have. Mixed methods can be a bit overwhelming because it took me a couple of months to do the analysis just for mine. But you should be aware that it's an option. If you don't want to be strictly one but not strictly the other, there is a middle road. Much like how there's also a road that I am completely and totally unfamiliar with, and that is the art side, the creative side. And that's typically you have a goal in mind of something that you wish to accomplish, and then it's, well, how would you go about doing it? So I could be thinking of things like, oh, we have evidence to suggest that people in Rome ate a certain way and that resulted in X, Y, and Z for them. So I'm going to see if I can replicate that, meaning I'm going to see if I can replicate the way that they produced food. And then if I can attempt to replicate the way they produce food because I'm getting the results that suggest that, I've figured out how they cooked. I'm not saying that that's something that you should do, or if people don't know that one, I'm sure people are fully aware of it, because we know that they used lead in all sorts of things to sweeten their food. But that would be an example of arts research. The goal is to create a product. The research isn't the, oh, hold on, let me analyze my data, and it's not the, let me listen to people speaking or reading a bunch of papers. The art research is, I'm going to produce something. And it's the act of me going through that production and seeing how does that compare to whatever the outcome is supposed to be if you're attempting to replicate the past or generate something that has never been done before. It's that comparison that turned out to be your data. Your methods are, what are you making and how are you making it? It's one of those things where I have basically no experience with this whatsoever, so if one of you does it, it's going to be a whole new world for me, and I kind of am excited about that. So it boils down to, you have so many ways that you could be doing these questions, that you could take your questions and give them a different spin, and suddenly everything you're doing is different. So there is no one way to do capital R research. There's no one way to answer the questions that you're ultimately going to come up with once you figure out what the actual knowledge gap is. The catch becomes, you're going to need to cite it. And the way that you cite in literature is not the same as you would cite in science, which is not the same way that you would cite in architecture, which is not the same way that you would cite in history, which is not the same way you would cite in psychology, which is not the same way that you would cite in math. Every domain has its own peculiar way of citing its sources, and I can't do that for you. We can't go through all the different ways and then, oh, let me give you a quiz on, do you understand all the ways to cite sources and the way that you do in-text citations and the way that you structure a paper. The way that you learn how to do that is you're reading the papers, and you notice, oh, they all seem to follow this general format. Meaning, the way that science papers work, because that's where I'm used to, you have your abstract, you have an introduction, you have introduction, background information. There might be a section that says here are our research questions, but that typically is rolled into the introduction. Here are our methods. Here are our results or data with some basic analyses. Then here's our discussion, ends with some conclusions. Okay, I could buy that for $1. Art research doesn't look like that. History research doesn't look like that. It doesn't follow those patterns. But they have all of those components. It's just not laid out the same way. When you turn things in, I'm going to be asking for certain things. So I'll be asking for, give me your background, give me your question, give me your methods, give me your data. That doesn't mean that, oh, those are each different sections or different chapters or stuff like that. No, no, no. You have to match what your particular style of writing and research turns out to be. It might be, oh yeah, I'm taking my introduction section, my background information might show up in 5 different places in my paper. That's fine. It's just do whatever yours needs. So what if I don't know how to cite it? We're all fully aware that there are things online that will cite things, that will generate citations for you. You shouldn't rely on it. You should learn to write these on your own. And it does help if you learn to model this after what others have done based upon the research that you've done, little R research and background papers. But still, there's no excuses for this. It shouldn't be just a list of links and things like that, because you shouldn't be looking up websites for these things anyway. So you have lots of options ahead of you. It's just a matter of picking where are you going to go with these options.